The measure of a civilization is not how it crowns the powerful, but how it treats the one nobody sees. The obsidian crown palace stood beneath a sky painted with violet stars, its towering black crystal walls reflecting ribbons of silver light that flowed across the capital like slow rivers. Every polished surface carried the weight of an empire that believed perfection could be measured by rank, ceremony, and obedience. Thousands of nobles gathered inside the great hall wearing shimmering ceremonial robes woven from living crystal fibers that changed color with every graceful movement. Above them floated enormous rings of luminous stone, casting soft golden light across marble floors so flawless they mirrored every face looking downward. At the highest point of the chamber rested the black throne, carved from a single piece of ancient obsidian crystal. Upon it sat Empress Veloria Syn. Her sapphire blue skin glowed softly beneath the palace lights, while long silver hair flowed across the back of the throne like liquid moonlight. Her calm silver eyes moved slowly across the assembled court. She listened to every speech, acknowledged every formal greeting, yet spoke almost nothing herself. Those who watched believed she was judging titles, wealth, and influence. None of them understood she was searching for something entirely different. Far below the throne, beyond the elegant nobles and decorated officers, another world quietly existed beneath their feet. Palace servants moved silently between towering columns, collecting empty crystal cups, adjusting ceremonial banners, polishing marble steps already shining with impossible perfection. Among them worked Nira. She was the smallest servant in the palace, slight in build, her simple gray uniform almost disappearing beside the magnificent clothing surrounding her. She kept her eyes lowered, careful not to interrupt conversations reserved for people considered important. Every polished floor reflected her presence, yet almost nobody ever looked directly at her. Near the eastern maintenance corridor, Michael Hayes tightened the final bolt, securing a heating conduit beneath the ceremonial platform. The human engineer wore a faded brown work jacket marked by years of repairs instead of medals. A heavy utility belt rested around his waist beside diagnostic tools polished through constant use rather than careful display. His worn work boots carried dust from service tunnels hidden beneath the palace where no noble had likely walked in generations. Michael quietly checked the temperature readings on his portable scanner before closing the maintenance panel. Everything appeared stable. Warm air flowed evenly through the great hall, protecting priceless crystal structures from sudden thermal shifts. Another successful repair. Another quiet job completed without anyone noticing the human responsible. That suited him perfectly. He preferred machines because machines cared nothing about status. They either worked or they did not. As he gathered his tools, a gentle sound reached him across the immense chamber. A small crystal cup had slipped from a serving tray carried by Nira. She caught it before it struck the floor, breathing a quiet sigh of relief that nobody seemed to hear. One nearby noble glanced toward her with visible annoyance before returning to his conversation as though she were no more significant than the polished stone beneath his feet. Michael watched the brief exchange from across the hall. Nothing dramatic had happened, nothing worthy of alarm. Yet something about the servant's careful movements stayed with him. She carried herself like someone who believed even breathing too loudly might become another mistake. High above them, Empress Veloria noticed the same moment. Her expression never changed. Her fingers rested calmly against the arm of the black throne while her silver eyes observed the unnoticed corners of the palace rather than the celebrated center. The ceremony continued with magnificent elegance, but somewhere beneath the music, beneath the speeches, and beneath centuries of tradition, something far more important had already begun. The ceremony reached its quiet rhythm as dignitaries from distant systems stepped forward one by one to present crystal tributes before the black throne. Every movement had been rehearsed for generations. Every bow matched ancient tradition. Every servant understood that even the smallest mistake could become part of palace memory forever. Nira carried a polished crystal tray through the center aisle with careful, measured steps. The delicate ceremonial cups resting upon it reflected hundreds of floating lights above the great hall. She held the tray close, concentrating on each breath while weaving between nobles whose elaborate robes spread across the marble floor like rivers of shimmering silk. Michael remained beside the eastern maintenance corridor, completing final system readings before leaving the palace. His portable scanner displayed stable temperatures across every heating conduit beneath the ceremonial platform. Satisfied, he closed the diagnostic screen and prepared to store his equipment. Before he could leave, a sharp metallic sound echoed across the immense chamber. One distinguished noble turned suddenly while extending an arm toward another guest. The flowing sleeve of his ceremonial robe brushed the edge of Nira's crystal tray. Time seemed to slow. One ceremonial cup slid across the polished surface before falling onto the marble floor below. The crystal shattered into dozens of glittering fragments that scattered beneath the golden light. Music stopped immediately. Conversations disappeared. Every face turned toward the servant standing motionless beside the broken cup. Nira lowered her eyes without speaking. Her hands trembled slightly, but she neither stepped backward nor attempted to explain herself. Years inside the palace had taught her that explanations from someone of her station rarely changed anything. The noble who had struck the tray looked down at the broken fragments for only a moment before pointing toward Nira with open disappointment. Carelessness has no place inside the imperial court, he declared calmly enough for everyone nearby to hear. Several other nobles nodded without question. None of them had actually watched the cup fall. They simply accepted the explanation offered by someone whose title carried more weight than a servant's silence. Michael looked from the shattered crystal to the position where the noble had been standing only seconds earlier. He had seen the entire accident while checking his maintenance scanner. The servant had done nothing wrong. She had even tried to steady the tray before the cup slipped away. Across the hall, Empress Valoria observed everything from the Black Throne. Her expression remained composed, revealing nothing. The royal court believed she watched the broken cup. In truth, her silver eyes rested upon the faces surrounding it. She noticed who hurried to assign blame. She noticed who looked away. Most importantly, she noticed the human engineer quietly setting his toolbox onto the marble floor instead of walking toward the palace exit. Nira slowly knelt to collect the shattered crystal pieces with careful hands. No servant moved to help her. No noble offered a word of kindness. The silence itself became heavier than the broken cup. Michael watched for another heartbeat. Then he stepped away from the maintenance corridor and began walking directly toward the center of the great hall. His footsteps echoed softly across polished marble, drawing puzzled glances from palace guards and royal attendants alike. He stopped beside the kneeling servant before calmly lowering himself to one knee. Without saying a word, he reached toward the scattered crystal fragments and began helping her gather the broken pieces from the floor. For the first time since the ceremony had begun, every person inside the imperial court looked not toward the throne, but toward the human who had quietly chosen to stand beside the one person everyone else had already decided to leave alone. Michael carefully placed the final crystal fragment onto the empty serving tray before looking toward Nira. "Are your hands all right?" he asked quietly. She seemed surprised that anyone had spoken to her before asking about the broken cup. She glanced down at her fingers, then nodded almost automatically. "Yes, thank you." Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. Around them, silence continued spreading through the great hall. The nobles did not understand why a human maintenance engineer had interrupted a royal ceremony simply to help a servant gather shattered crystal. To many of them, both individuals occupied the lowest places within the palace hierarchy. One elderly court official stepped forward with visible disapproval. "Human," he said firmly, "leave the servant to her responsibilities. This matter does not concern you." Michael slowly rose to his feet, still holding the tray filled with broken crystal pieces. His expression remained calm. "It concerns me because she did not cause this." A faint murmur passed through the assembled guests. The noble who had accidentally struck the tray folded his arms across his ceremonial robes. "Are you suggesting that I am mistaken?" Michael met the noble's eyes without raising his voice. "I am saying I watched what happened." Every word echoed clearly beneath the towering crystal ceiling. She held the tray securely. "Your sleeve caught the edge when you turned." Several nobles exchanged uncertain glances. None of them had expected someone without title or influence to contradict a respected member of the imperial court. Nira looked down immediately, wishing she could disappear beneath the polished marble floor. She had spent years surviving by remaining unnoticed. Now the attention of the entire palace rested upon her, because someone had chosen to speak in her defense. High above them, Empress Veloria remained perfectly still upon the black throne. Her silver eyes never left Michael. She had witnessed the accident from the beginning. She already knew the humans spoke the truth. Yet she offered no judgment. Not yet. The court believed the moment centered on a broken ceremonial cup. For the Empress, something far more valuable was unfolding. The noble gave a restrained smile that never reached his eyes. You are remarkably confident for someone hired to repair heating conduits. Michael nodded once. Machines teach useful habits, such as watching carefully before deciding who is responsible. The words landed with quiet weight. No insult hid inside them. Only simple honesty. Even that proved uncomfortable for those accustomed to unquestioned authority. Nira slowly accepted the tray from Michael with trembling hands. Please, she whispered. You do not need to do this for me. Michael answered without taking his eyes from the noble standing opposite him. Sometimes people need someone to stand beside them before they remember they are not alone. Those nearby heard every syllable. The royal guards standing along the walls remained motionless, but several lowered their eyes thoughtfully. Palace servants paused in their work, watching from distant corridors. Even the musicians quietly rested their instruments, waiting to see what would happen next. The noble looked toward the black throne as though expecting immediate support from the Empress. Instead, he found only calm silence. Veloria neither interrupted nor rescued anyone from the consequences of their own choices. She simply observed. Michael bent once more, lifted the last tiny crystal fragment from the marble floor, and placed it gently onto the tray. Then he handed the tray back to Nero with both hands, treating the servant with the same quiet respect others reserved only for royalty. In that single ordinary gesture, something invisible shifted inside the great hall. The broken cup no longer mattered. Every person present had begun revealing something far more fragile than crystal. They were revealing the true measure of their own character. The great hall remained wrapped in absolute silence. Even the floating crystal lights seemed to drift more slowly, as though the palace itself had paused to witness what would happen next. Michael stood beside Nero without the slightest trace of defiance on his face. He had not challenged the empire. He had only refused to abandon someone everyone else had already judged. The distinction mattered greatly to him, even if it appeared invisible to everyone else. The noble whose sleeve had struck the crystal tray stepped forward with measured confidence. His polished ceremonial robes shimmered beneath the golden light, while several influential officials quietly gathered behind him. Your words carry serious implications, he said. A maintenance worker should understand his place. Michael rested his toolbox beside his boots before answering. I understand my place very well. Then explain why you continue standing here. Michael looked briefly toward Nira before returning his calm gaze to the noble. Because she should not be standing here alone. Another wave of quiet whispers spread across the chamber. Nira lowered her eyes even farther, her hands still holding the tray of broken crystal. She had spent years believing that remaining invisible was the safest way to survive inside the palace. Now someone had willingly placed himself beside her where every eye could see. The feeling was unfamiliar enough that she could not find words for it. High above them, Empress Veloria watched every expression rather than every sentence. Some nobles displayed irritation. Others looked uncomfortable. A few palace servants had quietly stopped working altogether, watching with cautious hope. The Empress noticed each reaction with patient attention. Michael bent slightly and noticed a faint scratch running across the edge of the serving tray. It had not come from the broken cup. It came from years of constant use without replacement. He gently traced the worn metal with one finger before looking toward Nira. How long have you carried this tray? She hesitated. Almost 6 years. Has anyone replaced it? She quietly shook her head. The answer lingered in the air longer than expected. Michael looked around the magnificent chamber filled with priceless crystal sculptures, jeweled banners, and elaborate ceremonial decorations. Then he looked back at the servant holding equipment so worn that even a careful worker faced unnecessary risk every day. This tray should have been replaced long ago, he said softly. It is not her failure. It is ours. Those final words settled over the hall with unexpected weight. He had not blamed one person. He had spoken about shared responsibility. Several palace engineers exchanged thoughtful glances after hearing him. They recognized the truth immediately. Equipment always reflected the priorities of those responsible for maintaining it. If tools were neglected, people eventually suffered the consequences. One senior palace engineer quietly stepped toward Michael. "May I examine the tray?" Michael handed it over without hesitation. The engineer carefully inspected the worn edges, warped support frame, and weakened crystal fasteners before looking slowly toward the assembled officials. His expression changed from curiosity to concern. "The human is correct," he announced respectfully. "This serving equipment should have been retired many inspection cycles ago." A ripple of surprise moved across the court. The noble who had accused Nira remained silent for the first time since the accident. His certainty no longer appeared as solid as before. Empress Veloria finally rose from the black throne. The quiet sound of her footsteps descending the crystal stairs echoed gently through the chamber. No one spoke. No one moved. Every gaze followed the sapphire-skinned ruler as she walked not toward the nobles waiting closest to power, but toward the humans standing beside the weakest servant in the palace, while the distance between rank and character quietly became visible to everyone watching. Empress Veloria stopped only a few feet from Michael and Nira. The entire imperial court remained perfectly still as the sapphire-blue ruler looked first at the worn serving tray, then at the broken crystal pieces resting upon it, and finally at the human who had quietly refused to step away. Her silver eyes revealed neither approval nor disappointment. They simply observed. "You repaired the Eastern heating network this morning," she said calmly. Michael nodded once. "Yes, Your Majesty. And now you are inspecting serving equipment that was never assigned to you." "Because I noticed another problem." A faint smile almost appeared at the corner of the Empress's lips before disappearing again. "You seem unable to ignore broken things." Michael answered without hesitation. "If something can be repaired, someone should at least try." Those simple words drifted through the great hall more powerfully than any formal speech. The senior palace engineer still held the damaged tray in both hands while carefully studying its weakened frame. He turned it toward the assembled officials and pointed to several tiny fractures hidden beneath decorative trim. "These support joints have been failing for a long time," he explained. The tray became unstable because maintenance requests were repeatedly postponed. The servant could not have prevented this. Quiet uncertainty spread through the nobles. Several administrators exchanged uneasy looks as they realized written reports would reveal exactly who had ignored replacement requests over the years. Nira stood motionless, struggling to understand what was happening around her. For as long as she could remember, mistakes always belonged to servants. Today, for the first time, someone had searched for the real cause instead of the easiest person to blame. Empress Veloria slowly accepted the worn tray from the engineer and examined its scratched surface herself. The polished crystal palace reflected across the damaged metal, creating a striking contrast between imperial perfection and everyday neglect. "How many servants still use equipment in this condition?" she asked quietly. No one answered immediately. The silence itself became an answer. Michael looked toward the maintenance markings stamped beneath the tray. Faded inspection numbers caught his attention. He stepped closer with respectful caution. "May I?" The Empress handed him the tray. He brushed away years of accumulated polish from a narrow corner until a nearly invisible serial code appeared. Pulling out his portable scanner, he entered the identification number. Within seconds, archived maintenance records appeared across the small display. "This tray was scheduled for replacement 4 years ago," Michael said calmly. The request was approved by engineering, then canceled by administrative budget review. Every renewal request afterward received the same decision. Several heads slowly turned toward the financial ministers standing near the western columns. No accusations followed. The facts spoke quietly enough on their own. Nira looked at Michael with disbelief. He had not only defended her, he had patiently uncovered the truth buried beneath years of forgotten paperwork and quiet indifference. The Empress watched him close the maintenance file before returning the scanner to his belt. He did not look proud. He did not look victorious. He simply looked relieved that an innocent person no longer carried responsibility that had never belonged to her. Veloria understood then that the human had never entered the conversation to prove himself right. He had entered it to make certain someone weaker would not stand alone beneath the weight of someone else's mistake. Around them, the magnificent palace remained wrapped in profound silence, while countless crystal lights shimmered overhead. For the first time in many years, the imperial court found itself looking not at the brilliance of the Black Throne, but at the quiet strength of an ordinary man whose greatest instinct was neither ambition nor pride, but the simple refusal to let truth be forgotten because the person who needed it possessed no power to speak for herself. The great hall slowly came back to life, yet nothing inside it felt the same. Nobles who had once spoken with effortless confidence now exchanged careful whispers instead of proud declarations. Palace servants continued their duties, but for the first time many noticed quiet looks of respect following them through the corridors. The invisible line separating importance from insignificance had begun to fade. Michael returned to the eastern maintenance passage carrying his weathered toolbox, believing his responsibility inside the palace had ended the moment the truth became clear. He knelt beside an access panel beneath the marble floor and resumed inspecting the heating conduits exactly where he had left them before the ceremony. To him, unfinished work still mattered more than public attention. Warm air flowed steadily through the crystal pipes, while soft blue indicators confirmed every system remained stable. He smiled faintly, satisfied that the palace would remain comfortable for everyone, regardless of rank. Behind him, light footsteps echoed gently across the stone. Nira approached slowly, still wearing the same simple gray servant uniform. She stopped several feet away, uncertain whether she should interrupt. Michael noticed her reflection in the polished maintenance panel before turning with a friendly expression. "Everything all right?" he asked. Nira nodded, though emotion softened her voice. "I came to thank you." Michael rested a wrench inside the toolbox and leaned comfortably against the open service hatch. "You do not owe me thanks." She looked down at her hands. "No one has ever spoken for me before." The quiet honesty of that sentence lingered between them. Michael answered with the same calm sincerity that had guided every decision he had made inside the palace. "Everyone deserves someone willing to tell the truth." Nira looked toward the endless service corridor stretching beneath the magnificent palace. "I believed being invisible was the safest way to live." Michael gently closed the maintenance panel. "Sometimes it is, but invisible people usually notice the things everyone else forgets." Before Nira could reply, the senior palace engineer entered the corridor carrying a digital inspection slate. His expression held none of the distance it had earlier that morning. "Michael," he said respectfully, "I reviewed every maintenance archive after your findings." He handed over the inspection records. Michael quickly scanned the pages. Dozens of replacement requests for servant equipment had been delayed over many years, while decorative palace projects received immediate approval. The pattern was impossible to ignore. "This explains much more than one broken tray," Michael said quietly. The engineer nodded. "I have already ordered replacement equipment for every service division." Nira looked at the engineer with visible surprise. "All of it? Every cart, every tray, every transport frame, every maintenance tool that should have been replaced years ago?" Michael smiled. "That will prevent many future accidents." The engineer folded his hands behind his back. One person noticed a problem. Now the entire system improves. High above them, unseen through layers of crystal floors, the palace bells sounded softly to announce the closing of the imperial assembly. Their gentle notes drifted through the ventilation shafts, filling even the forgotten maintenance corridors with quiet music. At the same moment, Empress Valoria stood alone beside the black throne overlooking the vast chamber, now slowly emptying of guests. Advisors expected her to celebrate restored order. Instead, she remained deep in thought. Throughout her reign, she had studied generals, scholars, governors, and champions, believing leadership revealed itself through extraordinary achievements. Yet a human maintenance engineer had transformed the atmosphere of her entire court simply by refusing to abandon the weakest person in the room. She finally understood that character became most visible when no reward appeared possible. Looking across the palace she had ruled for decades, the Empress realized the greatest repair completed that day had never involved heating conduits, crystal trays, or maintenance records. It had begun quietly inside the hearts of those who had witnessed one ordinary human prove that compassion could restore what power alone never could. Morning sunlight filtered through the towering crystal ceiling, turning every polished corridor inside the obsidian crown palace into a river of silver and gold. The celebration had ended, but the quiet conversations it inspired continued, spreading farther than any royal proclamation. Palace servants walked with slightly straighter shoulders. Engineers inspected forgotten equipment with renewed purpose. Even members of the Imperial Guard greeted workers from the service corridors with respectful nods that had rarely existed before. Michael noticed the changes without fully understanding them. He simply believed people were having a better day. His attention remained fixed on the maintenance network beneath the eastern wing, where he carefully recalibrated thermal regulators one final time before preparing to leave the palace. His scanner confirmed that every conduit, every circulation line, and every environmental control system operated perfectly. He closed the inspection panel with quiet satisfaction. Nearby, Nira carried a brand-new serving tray through the corridor. The polished frame reflected crystal light without a single scratch upon its surface. She stopped beside Michael and smiled with a confidence that had not existed only a day earlier. "It feels strange," she admitted softly. Michael looked at the new equipment before smiling back. "Different can feel strange at first." She nodded. "I keep expecting someone to tell me I do not deserve it." Michael gently shook his head. "Good equipment is not a reward. It is something every worker should have from the beginning." Before she could answer, a palace attendant hurried into the maintenance corridor carrying an elegant black crystal tablet sealed with the imperial crest. He bowed respectfully toward Michael. "Her Imperial Majesty requests your presence in the Grand Council chamber." Michael blinked with visible surprise. "Are you certain?" "Personally requested." Nira looked at him with quiet encouragement. "You should go." Michael wiped his hands with a clean maintenance cloth, fastened his weathered toolbox, and followed the attendant through corridors that yesterday had barely acknowledged his existence. Palace staff stepped aside politely as he passed. Some offered grateful smiles. Others simply watched with thoughtful expressions. Inside the Grand Council chamber, every senior noble, military commander, chief engineer, and provincial governor had assembled beneath the immense black crystal dome. The atmosphere felt solemn rather than ceremonial. Empress Valoria stood before the black throne instead of sitting upon it. When Michael entered, she looked directly toward him. "Michael Hayes," she said calmly. "Please come forward." He walked across the polished floor until he stopped several feet from the Empress. Around him, hundreds of influential figures remained completely silent. Valoria slowly raised a small crystal memory sphere above her open hand. Soft blue light filled the chamber as recorded images appeared in the air. Every person watched the crystal projection replay the previous day's events exactly as they had unfolded. The noble's sleeve striking the tray, Nira attempting to save the falling cup, Michael kneeling to gather broken crystal beside the frightened servant. His quiet defense, his discovery of the neglected maintenance records, his refusal to seek praise after the truth emerged. The recording ended. Silence remained. Valoria lowered the memory sphere. "Yesterday," she said, "many believed they witnessed an accident." Her silver eyes slowly moved across the assembled court. They did not. Confused whispers spread through the chamber. The Empress continued before anyone could speak. "For many years I have searched for the one individual whose heart could not be influenced by rank, wealth, fear, or reward. Every position of power reveals confidence. Only moments without reward reveal character." Michael looked genuinely puzzled. "Your Majesty?" Valoria met his eyes with calm certainty. The broken cup was real. The neglected equipment was real. But the opportunity to choose compassion over comfort was also real. Yesterday was never only about a servant. It was the final measure of every soul inside this palace. Across the chamber, nobles slowly lowered their eyes as they realized the greatest examination in imperial history had carried no written questions, no announced beginning, and no warning that they had already revealed exactly who they truly were. The Grand Council chamber remained silent long after the Empress finished speaking. No one hurried to defend past decisions. No one challenged the truth preserved inside the crystal memory sphere. Every noble understood that rank had offered no advantage during a test designed to measure character rather than influence. Michael stood quietly where he had been asked to stop, still holding his weathered toolbox in one hand. He looked more uncomfortable receiving attention than he had while defending Nira the day before. That simple humility did not escape Empress Veloria. She slowly descended the final steps leading away from the Black Throne until she stood directly before the human engineer. The distance between ruler and worker disappeared without a single word. "Michael Hayes," she said gently, "when you defended Nira, what reward did you expect?" Michael answered almost immediately. "None, Your Majesty." "Did you believe anyone would remember your name?" He smiled faintly. "Probably not." "Then why did you speak?" Michael looked toward the towering crystal windows where morning light washed softly across the chamber. "Because if I had remained silent, she would have carried a burden that did not belong to her. I could have repaired the heating system and gone home, but I would have remembered staying quiet much longer than I would have remembered any repair." A quiet breath passed through the gathered court. His answer contained no grand philosophy. It sounded like something he had simply lived by for many years. Veloria slowly nodded. "That is exactly the answer I hoped someone would one day give." She turned toward the assembled nobles and senior officials. "Power has surrounded this throne for centuries. Intelligence has advised it. Strength has defended it. Wealth has sustained it. Yet compassion has too often waited outside these doors, hoping someone might invite it inside." No one interrupted. Every face remained fixed upon the Empress. She lifted the imperial scepter only long enough to place it across the arms of the Black Throne instead of holding it herself. The symbolic gesture startled the chamber more than any speech. "Yesterday," she continued, "the weakest servant possessed no voice powerful enough to protect herself. Hundreds witnessed her silence. One human chose to become her voice without asking whether doing so would benefit him. Nira stood near the rear of the chamber with other palace servants. Tears quietly gathered in her eyes, not from sadness, but from finally realizing that her existence had mattered enough for someone to defend it openly. Michael looked toward her and offered the same reassuring smile he had given the moment they first spoke beside the broken crystal. Nothing about him had changed. That, more than anything else, convinced Veloria that she had judged correctly. The Empress faced the human once more. "Many seek greatness because they desire the throne," she said softly. "You never desired either." Michael answered honestly. "I came here to repair heating conduits." A few gentle smiles appeared throughout the chamber. Even several senior nobles quietly lowered their guarded expressions. Veloria allowed herself the smallest smile as well. "Perhaps that is why you succeeded in repairing something much more valuable." Sunlight brightened across the polished black floor, while crystal reflections surrounded the human and the Empress in calm silver light. At that moment, the imperial court understood that the future of the empire would no longer be shaped only by those born closest to the throne. It would also belong to those who possessed the quiet courage to stand beside the person everyone else had already chosen to overlook. The afternoon light settled gently across the obsidian crown palace, turning every black crystal wall into a mirror that reflected the sky beyond the capital. The Grand Council chamber remained filled with silent witnesses as Empress Veloria slowly approached the Black Throne one final time. Resting upon the seat lay the imperial crown and the ancient royal seal carried by every ruler before her. For centuries, those symbols had passed only through bloodlines, political alliances, and victories that reshaped worlds. Today, the palace prepared to witness something no historian had ever recorded. Michael still stood exactly where he had been throughout the council, his weathered toolbox resting quietly beside his boots. He had not stepped closer to the throne. He had not asked for recognition. He had not imagined that the conversation unfolding around him could possibly concern his own future. Nero watched from the servants' gallery with hopeful eyes while palace engineers, royal guards, governors, scholars, and nobles filled every level of the immense chamber beneath floating crystal lights. Empress Veloria lifted the imperial crown only long enough to place it gently back upon the throne instead of wearing it herself. Then she turned toward Michael with complete calm. "An empire can inherit authority," she said softly, "but it cannot inherit character. Character must always be chosen." Her silver eyes met his without hesitation. "Yesterday, I watched the strongest nobles protect their reputations. I watched the wisest officials protect their positions. I watched the wealthiest citizens protect their pride. Only one person protected someone who had nothing to offer in return. Michael looked genuinely unsettled. Your Majesty, I only told the truth. Vealoria smiled with quiet warmth. Exactly. She walked toward him until only a single step separated them. A ruler who serves only the powerful creates fear. A ruler who notices the forgotten creates hope. Yesterday you proved which kind of leader you already are. She extended the royal seal toward him with both hands. A quiet wave of astonishment moved through the chamber, yet no voice interrupted the moment. Michael slowly shook his head. I am not royalty. Neither is compassion, Vealoria answered. Yet every civilization depends upon it. He looked down at the seal before speaking carefully. If I accepted something like this, I would want every servant, engineer, guard, worker, and child inside this palace treated with the same dignity you would give the throne itself. The Empress nodded without the slightest pause. That is precisely why I am asking. She placed the royal seal into his hands. The ancient crystal glowed softly, as though recognizing the quiet sincerity surrounding it. Then, before anyone expected it, Empress Vealoria bowed her head. The captain of the royal guard followed immediately. The council members followed next. Nobles, governors, engineers, palace servants, and every citizen inside the chamber slowly lowered themselves in silent respect. Nira stood among them with tears shining gently in her eyes, smiling not because a human had been honored, but because kindness had finally been recognized as the highest law inside the empire. Michael remained standing in humble disbelief, holding the royal seal with the same careful hands that had repaired heating conduits and gathered broken crystal from the palace floor only a day before. No music played. No proclamation echoed through the chamber. Only peaceful silence filled the palace beneath the glow of black crystal and distant stars. Years later, children across the empire would remember that an empress once chose her king not because he sought a crown, but because he quietly knelt beside the weakest servant when nobody believed her life deserved defending. And in that silence, an empire finally discovered that the greatest throne would always belong to the heart willing to lift another before lifting itself.